Hmm. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Intro to Home Composting Lunch and Learn. We'll get started in just another minute while um, folks are trickling in. Thanks for being here. All right, we'll get started. Oops. Yeah. Good afternoon and welcome to the Intro to Home Composting webinar by the Master Recycler Composter program of Thurston County. My name is Jenny Post and I'm the program assistant for the WCU Master Gardener and Master Recycler Composter programs of Thurston County. We're so glad that you were able to join us today. Before I pass it over to Corey, I would just want to go over a few housekeeping items. Your microphone and camera are disabled during the presentation, and so is the Zoom chat, but we encourage you to participate by asking questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A function. And then I have one poll at the beginning here, so would love your response on that. And then if you have questions along the way, please type your questions in the Q&A and we'll have a number of spots throughout the presentation where we will stop and answer those questions. The presentation is being recorded and the link will be shared in the follow-up materials. So our presenter today is Corey Carlton, Program Coordinator with the WCU Thurston County Extension. Corey coordinates the WCU Master Gardener and Master Recycler Composter programs. And while Corey's getting set up, I'm going to launch the poll. So we're just curious if you have a compost pile or compost bin at home, or if you're looking to start one. All right, we're about 50-50. 50% already have a compost pile and 50% want to start one. So you're in a good place. Um, well, we're here to help troubleshoot and help you be successful. And yeah, take it away, Corey.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. Welcome. And again, we're excited that you're here today. Again, with this particular presentation, on our lunch and learn about composting is a great way to get excited about what's coming, the spring happening right now. And there's lots of things in the garden that you'll be wanting to compost. And so by doing this refresher now, hopefully it'll get you inspired to do some things before the growing season starts to get prepared. And then also we're here all throughout the growing season in case you have questions that pop up along the way. And we'll share more about how to get in contact with us to get your individual specific questions answered throughout the growing season. All right, so what we're going to do start is we're going to just do a brief recap. For today's presentation, we're going to focus on composting at your residence, wherever you live. That's what we're going to be focusing in. You do have some other options, though, for folks that have curbside service. There is an organics collection that you can add on to your weekly collection. So that could be from whoever your hauler is, LeBay, or any of the other haulers here in Thurston County. And so that is another service where you could put your yard debris into a separate bin, not your recycle bin, but an actual separate bin called the organics bin that you could then put in your organics material. So stuff from your yard debris, lawn clippings, etc. You also have another option to self-haul it. So if you don't have curbside, you can bring it to the Thurston County Waste and Recovery Center in Hawks Prairie and also drop off your organics there. But for today's presentation, we're going to focus in on managing yard debris on site at your house. So that's kind of the focus of this lunch and learn for today. I will also say that it's a lot for 1 hour to try to get everything that you might need to know about composting in just a 1 hour lunch and learn. So we do have a YouTube video that we did back in 2021 that spends a little bit more time, goes a little bit more in depth. And then, like I said, we also have more opportunities to connect with us later on throughout the growing season. And so yeah, there'll be more opportunities to find how we can get connected with getting those very site-specific questions answered. In the meantime, if you want to spend a little bit more time going through some of the concepts a little bit in depth, I would encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and watch the home composting webinar we did back in 2021. All right, so let's get started. What is compost? So compost here, this is a textbook definition. Again, I'm not going to read all the slides, but this one I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page so that we understand what actual compost is. Simply a combination of yard debris like grass clippings and fallen leaves or kitchen scraps such as fruit or vegetable spoils separated from the waste stream, placed into an environment suitable for decomposition. And we use this compost ultimately to fertilize the soil, put nutrients back into that soil so the plants can then uptake it. I will say that with compost, it is a variable science, and it's similar to when you're making a recipe. Um, you can make a cake, but there's lots of different types of cake that you can make based on the ingredients you're putting into it. Compost is the exact same way. Different items you put into the compost pile will result in a little bit of a different finished product. Yes, it's all still compost, but you may have different nutrients, different textures, all of that based on what you're putting into it. So we're going to try to give you the basic recipe here for you to start, and then you're going to have to figure out what you have in your own yard in order to manage to make sure that the ratios are right so that you get a good finished product. Before you begin, you need to ask yourself a few questions. And so for those that are new to composting, these are the questions that are more applicable to you. Those that already currently have compost piles and maybe are having some trouble, ask these questions to figure out maybe this is the reason why your compost isn't doing as well as what you had hoped it to be. And it might be because some of these couple of these questions. So how much space do you have? This is the one thing that you'll have to determine what size of the compost pile is best for you based on how much space that you have. Some folks, do you live in a single family residence? Do you have acreage, or do you live in a high rise or a multifamily unit? You can still compost in a multifamily unit. Typically, we encourage worm composting as being one of your primary methods to manage food scraps. But also any of the other types of dwellings could also have varying levels of different composting styles that work best. So we have to evaluate how much space you have and what are you actually going to be composting? So that's the next question. How many people are in your house, in your residence? Is it just one or two people, or three, four, five, 10 people in your house? That will determine what the different composting methods based on the number of people that you have living at your residence. You also need to think about what materials would you like to compost and ultimately to divert those from the waste stream. So you're looking at what parts of your yard that you typically have a lot of organic material or yard debris there. Are you managing that? Are you managing a lawn? Are you managing woody debris from trees and shrubs? All of that stuff will also help you determine what piles and what styles of composting would be best suited for you. So let's think about what types of materials can you compost at home. Some of them that most folks think about are, again, the yard debris and the fruit and vegetable matter. So that's like you cutting up your fruits and vegetables in preparation for a meal, and then you have the parts of the fruit or vegetable that you don't want to consume. So that's the part that you could then end up putting into a compost pile. So we've talked about yard debris, fruit and vegetable scraps, and lawn clippings, but here are some other things that you could also compost that you may not even realize you could put into a home system. Certain paper products. So napkins, paper towels, things of that nature, as long as they're not soaked in a chemical, that would be fine to put into your compost pile. And I would say with the correct ratios with all of this. You don't want to over add any of these products. There's a right balance we're going to get into, that ratio that you need in order for your compost pile to work effectively. So there's, like I said, with all of these, we're going to go through as far as what those percentages are. Sawdust is fine, again, within moderation. Wood chips, smaller the better, but it's used as a bulking agent to kind of provide some structure to your pile. Eggshells, coffee grounds, tea bags, and some manures. We're going to cover the manures on our next slide about what manures we can't put in, but all of those are things that we could add in. The other important other things there, pet hair, uh, cotton clothing, 100% cotton clothing can also go into a compost pile, broken up into smaller pieces. So any of that kind of these other kind of more organic type materials could also be added into your compost pile. All right. So what can't you compost at home? So these are a few of the items that we want to avoid. Hazardous waste or trash, that's really a critical piece. Meats, oils, or dairy food waste. The fats in these items, meats, especially in the dairy food there, those coat the bacteria. In a compost pile, we want to be considered a bacteria farmer, meaning we want to encourage bacteria growth in our compost pile so that it can actually start to break down the food residues um, and make that into finished compost. If you coat that in a layer of fat or oil, the bacteria have a harder time getting to it. So, for an example, you had a salad and you didn't eat it all, yet it's coated in ranch dressing. That salad will end up going rancid first before the bacteria can actually break through the ranch dressing fat layers before it could actually get to that lettuce to there. So it would be better to actually toss that salad rather than, especially if it's heavily coated in a dressing, in order to not cause other problems in your compost pile. An undressed salad that you had extra, or the parts of the salad that let's say the lettuce that you didn't want to eat, then that could easily go into a compost pile. Spoiled food. So let's say you have a can of dented something and you're not really sure, again, with the denting in it, how long it's been there, you don't really want to eat it. Don't put it in your compost pile. Again, if you're going to end up putting that compost onto your vegetable garden, which you are then going to consume those fruits or vegetables. So, um, anything with a potential of a pathogen you don't want to put in your compost pile. Certain weeds are fine. Typically, weeds that haven't gone to seed are better. So weed seeds are one of those things where they're not always killed off in a home system. It just depends on how hot your pile gets. So if the weed has already gone to seed, I would probably not put those particular plants in there, especially if it's more of an aggressive plant. So, and there's certain ones obviously we don't want to put in there at all as well. Some of those are what we call more aggressive plants like ivy, quackgrass, morning glory, things of that nature, where they act more like they're a nuisance plant, an invasive compared to some of the other plants that I would consider um, less of a risk. Diseased or thorny plants, typically thorny plants, the only reason why you're not putting them in there is because typically those thorns take a lot longer to break down. And then also when you're processing the compost, it could be just of a safety concern about you getting pricked with them. Diseased plants, there are certain plants that have certain diseases that I would not put in a home system, again, because those spores are not broken down in the home composting system. Sometimes they are done at a commercial facility where the temperatures are double or triple what you can get in a home system, but certain diseases, it's best just to put them into the trash. Limited citrus and cedar. Citrus and cedar are natural antibacteria killers. So in a compost pile, again, you want to be a bacteria farmer. So you want to put some citrus and cedars fine in there, but don't put, let's say you had a party with a ton of citrus. And schools tend to have this issue, or daycares tend to have this problem with their compost piles because they typically eat oranges or for snack, and they put a whole bunch of them in there, and then the compost pile stalls. And that's just because the bacteria were killed off because, again, the limited citrus there, the citrus in it kills off the bacteria. Treated painted wood, again, barriers for the bacteria to get through that wood. Hot plastics and bioplastics, they don't break down in a home system. Barbecue ash is the same way. So a little bit's fine. It acts as a it will make your soil more alkaline. So if you are wanting, if you're trying to grow specific acid-loving plants, for example, like blueberries, and then you put a bunch of ash on around that, you're actually going to drop the pH of that particular soil, and then your plants are going to do well. So, especially again, those plants that wanted a little bit more on the acid side rather than on the basic side. So, barbecue ash, whether it be from a campfire, like campfire wood, or from an actual barbecue, you'd have to be minimal and also be mindful of whether your soil actually needs it. Also, barbecue, if you use charcoal briquettes, there's also other chemicals that are in those charcoal briquettes in order to help bind that into a briquette itself. So you would not want to put that in there. Some liquids are fine. Typically, water's the best. I would not be putting a ton of like sugary drinks in there because you're also just going to attract other nuisance pests. Dirt and soil, you only need it to when you're starting a pile in order to establish bacteria into that compost pile. Other than that, you don't need to add it. It actually, too much dirt in your pile will actually stall it. And then pet manures, let's go over that. So our ones that are great are rabbit, alpaca, chicken. Those are high level of the manures that actually provide a lot of nutrients to your composting process. Horse and cow are kind of the middle of the road, and that's just because a lot of their manures also have bedding in it, which makes it a little bit longer of a process. Where the top tier ones they burn faster, and then the ones that we never want to put in our yard, our compost piles, are dog, cat, and pig. So again, those pathogens they carry much higher level pathogens that do not break down in a home system. So those are our manures. We've already talked a little bit about plant disease, but again, there are certain diseases there that I would not, if that plant has a specific disease, I would not be putting that in my home system. So that's where we do have follow-up resources where we can help you with determining whether or not that goes into your pile or not. Oh, we're at questions time.
Yeah, Corey, there was a question asking, what about deer?
Deer poop? Is that what you think?
I was gonna get clarification. Yes, deer poop.
Okay. If you have a pile that is not contained, meaning it's not in a closed system, yes, you have the risk of wild animals to poop in your compost pile. That would be deer, raccoons, possums, all of that. Uh, Typically, if you're looking at a deer manure, that one also deer are omnivores. So I'm sorry, herbivores, where raccoons and possums are omnivores, which meaning they eat meat and plant material. Deer, I wouldn't be as concerned about it being into a pile and breaking down there. I would say if you notice more raccoon and possums there, and then you're wanting to take that pile, especially in a cold system where you've just let it sit for a long period of time, it really has to get to a hot enough temperature that you want that manure to break down to be effective to put on your vegetable beds. So I'd be if I had a bunch of raccoons or possums in my area, I would try to use an enclosed bin system to try to get those temperatures up and try to prevent the manures from getting into, especially if you're using it in a vegetable garden where you're going to consume it. Okay, other
Well,
questions?
yeah, how can we access this material? It's great, but I missed the link in the first slide.
Yep, you're going to get a recording of all of this, and then we're going to send you a follow-up email with all the links that will have all of the information to where you can get all of our handouts and our web pages that have all the follow-up information. Like I said, it's a little hard to get the whole concept of composting within 1 hour. So we're going to try a quick overview. And then, like I said, you'll be able to go back and really pick the parts that you want to review. And then you'll have an opportunity to still connect with us via email or at some of our outreach booth events throughout the community. Okay, we'll keep moving for right now, and then we'll keep come back for another set of questions there. Okay, so let's actually talk about the composting process. Okay, so in the composting process, two things are automatically going to happen, whether humans are involved or not. You're going to have organic waste, and you're going to have the microherd, which is all of the bacteria, the fungi, the worms, the arthropods. That is a natural process. It's going to happen whether humans are involved with it. Okay. The the way that we add humans into this composting process is by adding us into the mix will actually speed up the process. So compost happens, and typically if you had a pile in your backyard and you did nothing to it, you just kept on putting stuff there, in 2 years, traditionally, you will start to see that there's finished compost at the bottom of that pile. Okay. If you want to speed that process up and get compost faster, that's where we are added into the composting mix. So if you looked at this car here and the composting process was the waste, organic waste was the fuel, and the actual engine of the car was the microherd, that would normally just function. Okay. So that would just be there. But if we want that car to move, we have to add us into it to make it faster. Okay. So we use the fuel, and the engine is what we call the cold system. And then if we want to make it a hot system, we add a humans into it. For today, we're just going to focus in on the cold and the hot composting, otherwise known as active and passive. Okay. We are not going to talk about vermicomposting, which is composting using worms, and then also bokashi composting, which is a totally different method of composting that is also geared for more food scraps. But that bokashi is actually a anaerobic process, where the rest of the composting process listing there all require oxygen to break down. Where bokashi, it's more of a fermentation where you want the oxygen not be part of the process. Completely different method, and we'll have different opportunities to share when we'll have an upcoming workshop about that particular method. But for right now, for today's presentation, we're going to focus on the cold and the hot composting. So cold here is typically is you putting it into a pile someplace on your yard. It doesn't cost anything because literally you're just putting it into a spot. You're not turning it, you're just letting it sit. And ultimately, that compost will break down. And so something like this would be a space where if you had, again, just a part of your yard that you've marked as being my composting area, I keep dumping all my yard debris onto this pile. At the end of 2 years, at the bottom of that pile, you'll end up having finished compost without any extra added work or anything. So here's some pros and cons of the cold system. It could take up, again, the length of time, 2 years there. Not good for food waste. If you think about it, that pile is sitting there and it's exposed to lots of different things, meaning, again, all kinds of animals could also be in there. So again, if you have a raccoon or possum problem, putting food waste into a cold system probably not ideal because you're just feeding them. You're not restricted to a pile size. Literally, you can make the pile as big as you want. You are going to get some greater diversity of organisms because that pile is touching the soil below. So that means the micro herd can move in and out of your pile freely from the soil. And once you actually start the pile, you just keep adding to it. So it's not a lot of work as far as having to turn the pile or anything of that nature, but just know that it's a slower process. And some of the weed seeds are not going to break down or be destroyed because the fact that the pile does not heat up as hot as a hot system. So that means weed seeds and some diseases still may survive even through the whole finished composting process. So again, there's just like putting it into a pile in your yard, letting it sit there, and yeah, coming back in a couple of years and having it be finished. In a hot system, again, you plus turning and adding moisture to your pile will increase the rate of decomposition. So that's the theory. And some of the time it can be done by actually using a bin. These are both plastic bins, but there's all different types of bins. And that's where we have a handout that goes through the pros and cons of each of the bin styles. And you're going to have to pick the one that works best for your specific area. This one at the top, the round bin there, we tend to use those for if we want to put food scraps in there because there's less air holes for rodents to get in, where the bin styles on the bottom, Those have more slats, and so that's better for yard debris or yard waste, and not so as much food debris because the fact that the rodents can easily get in and out of the bin um, and get that food if again it's not processed enough. So with a hot system there, depending on the whole process, you could get finished compost between 4 and 6 months. It just depends on how much you want to be part of that process. Yes, it can be labor intensive because you actually need to turn the pile, you need to water it, and you need to manage the size of it, which the best size is 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. And in that, typically your commercial bins that you buy, they're already set up in that size because that's the size that's scientifically proven that actually will break down your compost within that 4 to 6 month range. With the hot system, again, you'll get higher temperatures there. But that being said, you can get up to typically 160, 180 would be pretty much the max for anything in your home system. Once you start going above 140, though, then you're also going to start killing off some of those beneficial organisms. So that's where you want to be mindful of that, not getting your pile too hot. Because yes, compost fires can exist. Typically, those happen in commercial facilities where the temperatures get up again, double or triple what we get in a home system. But we have had compost piles in a residence start on fire just because they put in improper things that shouldn't have been in there to begin with. So chemicals, things like that, and then they were dried out, and sure enough, a fire started because of that. So you do want to be mindful again of what you're putting into your piles, and that also that you want to make sure that you're watching those temperatures. Getting a good compost thermometer is also part of your tools that we encourage you to look at what supplies you need in order to be monitoring that pile appropriately. Okay, so in a container, do you need one? The answer is no. You could still do a cold system and, like I said, put them in a pile and not have any type of bin whatsoever. But if you want a hot system, it's definitely helpful if you have a bin. These are all different types of bins. Again, we have a handout, and in our workshop, hands-on workshops, we go through and show you the pros and cons of each of these bin styles. There's lots of different ones out there, but again, they each have their pros and cons about why you would pick that one. Pallets are also another option. Wire is also another option there. So, and again, just putting it into a pile. So this is the QR code to our Compost Bin Pro and Con handout. It just takes you to our webpage, and you can find this handout there, which again goes through all the different styles that are typically found on the market today and why you would pick this one compared to another one. Um, and like I said, this will be all in the follow-up email that will also come out to you after this presentation. Okay, questions?
Yes, we had one question come in back to the manure. Rat and mouse manure seems unavoidable. Is it a problem?
Yep. So it's going to be part of the thing that's going to happen. Again, that's another reason why if you have a food scraps in a hot system, those temperatures will work on that manure and break it down. So that's the most important piece is that you want to have those right ratios of your hot system, so that way you can get those temperatures up high enough to help with the decomposition process. Any other questions?
No more questions right now.
Okay, let's keep going. We'll have another question break in a little bit. Okay, so it's now time to build the pile. So we have our bin here, and the number one place what we want to start with is location. So you want to have it in a space that you're going to use. So you don't want to have it so far in the back of your property that you're not going to want to go out there, or it's too far to get the materials out there. But at the same time, you don't want to have it someplace where you're going to be, doing a lot of entertaining or hanging out, just because, again, you don't want to necessarily, some people feel it's like an eyesore to look at it there. So you want to make sure that you pick the right location for it. And also just making sure that you have access to water is another part that is really critical. We've had a lot of problems with folks, their bins stalling, and then they realized that the biggest frustration for them is trying to get the water to the actual compost pile. So when you're picking a spot, you need to make sure that you have water access to your pile. The other important part about that is that some of the bins here is they will come with a plastic base. When we put our bins at our demonstration gardens that we have here in the county, we don't use that base. And that's just because we want the microbes in the soil to freely be able to move in and out of the pile. So, but the problem would be is that if I have let's say a mouse or a rat issue in my neighborhood where I have a higher level of mice and rats, what I would do is put a layer of hardware cloth under that compost pile. So that way, then it's harder for them moving through that screen, but the microbes can freely move, but the rats and rodents can't. So moles, voles, mice, and rats that are necessarily coming into the piles, the hardware cloth on bottom will prevent, it'll be harder for them to get through and prevent some of those larger animals from getting into it if you had that piece of hardware cloth underneath it compared to a solid surface, which some of these bins will be sent with you with it. So the solid surface bottoms just prevent those microbes from going in and out of the pile. We do have a video on our YouTube channel that goes through all the tools that you might need. So I'm not going to spend time right now going through them, but again, you want to make sure you have access to water, hoses, different rakes. We have composting manure forks. We also have wheelbarrows, buckets, tarps. These are all things that can be helpful in the composting process. You need something to break things up. So whether it be pruners or a small saw, a composting thermometer is helpful for monitoring the temperatures, but the number one tool that you need to make sure that you use when you're using compost is gloves. So again, you're working with all kinds of microbes, and you want to make sure that those microbes are staying on the outside of your gloves and not getting to any cuts or scrapes that you might have in your hands. So just for safety's sake, always wear gloves when you're composting. All right, so let's actually look at the composting process. So you've got bacteria and fungi, and they are eating and processing the organic materials. So you have two types of groups called the carbons, and you also have sources of nitrogen. So the carbons, those are considered browns. It has nothing to do with color. It's just that's the common term that folks use. And those are what we consider our bulking agents, and those are more, as we said, in the carbohydrate process. So they use the bacteria will break down those carbohydrates, and as a result, in mixing it with the nitrogen, you'll have a finished compost. But you need to have a right ratio between the carbons and the nitrogens, which we'll get to in a minute. Nitrogens, those are the proteins that build the strong bodies. Those are for the decomposers, but most importantly, those are the energy boosts for your pile. And the energy is typically used fairly quickly. And then after that, the one thing you need to do to make sure that your pile doesn't stall is by adding nitrogen back into the pile as the compost is working. So again, these two kind of categories, carbons and nitrogens, otherwise known as browns and greens, it doesn't have anything to do with color. It's just the structure of those materials and how they act in the decomposition process. So let's take a look at a couple of examples about what is considered a nitrogen and what's a carbon. So nitrogen source, they're typically have more moisture in them, so they tend to be fleshier and also are viewed as being used in that nitrogen form right after they've been processed, meaning you just cut the lawn, so now you have the fresh grass clippings, your fruit and vegetable scraps, tea bags, weeds without seeds, fresh coffee grounds, and if you notice on the carbon side, it says old coffee grounds. So the difference between fresh and old is typically about 48 hours. And for that reason is because the nitrogen that is in that fresh coffee grounds will actually volatilize into the air after 48 hours. So the coffee grounds, if it's freshly brewed within those 48 hours, and again, estimate, we're not talking exact minute on the 40-hour mark, but within that first 2 days of being brewed, it will act as a nitrogen. But after that, if you use coffee grounds afterwards that have been brewed longer than 48 hours, it acts more like a carbon as a bulking agent because, again, that nitrogen has already volatilized into the air. Again, we already talked about manures, and then some eggshells and some citrus okay. Eggshells, the one thing I will say the downside of eggshells in a compost pile in large volumes is that they will attract snails to your compost pile because snails are looking for sources of calcium to build their shells. And because they're always growing and needing to build new shells, they're always looking for calcium sources. So if you have a ton of eggs shells in your compost pile, more snails will find your pile more attractive. Let's look at a couple of the carbon examples. Again, dry, coarse, sawdust, dried leaves, straw, cardboard, old coffee grounds, and small twigs and chips. So if you think about looking at both of those lists, again, the carbons tend to be drier, bulkier, and the nitrogen are soft, moist, and have a lot more moisture in them. All right, so here's the magic recipe. 1 green to 2 browns plus air and water equals compost. So this is the recipe. And you're like, well, what does that mean? 1 green, it's by volume. So 1 shovelful of greens to 2 shovelfuls of browns. 1 wheelbarrow of green to 2 wheelbarrows of brown. 1 dump truck of green to 2 dump trucks of brown. Air and water, mix it all together, and that would be compost. So again, it's 1 to 2 ratio. Air and water, adding that together, finished compost. So we do have a video again on our YouTube channel that talks about going through the different greens and browns, and we also walk you through the actual building of a pile. Again, for today's presentation, just being the hour it is, we couldn't spend all the time in looking at all of these options, so we have other follow-up resources for you. Questions?
No questions right now.
Okay, let's keep going then. All right, let's build the pile. So when you're building a pile, you want to break things up into smaller pieces. So if you have a large limb, you want to break that up into smaller pieces. If you have some large branches, breaking them up into smaller pieces. You need some structure, but most of this you need to break down into smaller pieces. So that way, especially if you want finished compost within that 4 to 6 month, you want to make sure that those leaves and all those other yard debris is broken up into the smaller the pieces, the better. Okay. So my best thing is if you're having a rough day, at let's say, the rest of the day and you're at home now at the end of the day and you just want to get some energy out, go out to the compost pile and just break things up. So in that case, it's a great way in order to get what your compost in the size that it needs, but also get some frustration out from maybe a rough day. The important thing about the composting process is by adding that oxygen and the water and the right material ratio, what happens is those microorganisms, they're breaking those items down, and the metabolic activity of those microorganisms, mainly the bacteria and the fungus, will break down that organic matter that we're putting in there, whether it be leaves or any of the other branch material, etc. Turning that pile then has provides enough oxygen for those bacteria that really love that oxygen in order to break down those organic materials faster, and as a byproduct, heat is produced. So your pile, all of a sudden, you'll start to see those temperatures heat up, and sometimes you'll see maybe steam coming up from your pile. That's what you're seeing, the heat coming off the pile is just a byproduct of the microherd working that pile with the combination of oxygen and water in order to process those materials faster. So if you're looking at it and you're wondering, whoa, my pile's actually heating up. Yes, that's just a byproduct of the decomposition process. That's the bacteria, the water, and the oxygen all working together. So that's why we call it the wow factor. Water, oxygen equals warmth. And that's just from the bacteria and the fungus. So how do you get air into your pile? You can use lots of different tools. You don't have to buy specialty tools, even though they are out there. They are helpful, but you can also use basic stuff. Sticks, pipes, PVC pipe, a pitchfork. Compost turner is this one here. Has these blades on it, and once you put it into your bin, the blades will flop out and actually help mix the pile. But like I said, you don't have to get these specialty ones. You could work with whatever kind of tool that you have. But the most important part is getting air into that pile. There's lots of other ways. So commercially, these are a couple on the right, the middle and the right picture there are both from commercial facilities. The middle picture is like a blow up balloon. So what they do is they'll pipe air into this balloon, and then the balloon goes throughout the entire pile and forces air into the pile that way. The one on the right is they actually have holes built into the floor, and our curbside organic material will come to there. They'll dump it on the floor, start to mix it with the water there, and then oxygen is forced up through the floor into the pile, like jet, like force as far as to get that up into the pile. The one on the left picture, that's actually at a community garden, and some schools use it this way too. Sometimes they have these giant earth tubs or earth machines, and it's hard to get oxygen into the middle, so they use these PVC pipes that are drilled with holes in it as little smokestacks. So basically, what they do is they put them in there so that way the oxygen will have a greater chance to get down into the PVC pipe and then out through the holes that'll get into the center of the pile. So that's another way to help get air into really giant piles. We also have a video about how much water is needed in order to have an effective pile. And then also, how do you know when the compost pile is finished? In fact, that's our number one watched video on our YouTube channel is how do I know when it's ready? So typically here in Washington, a lot of folks underwater their piles, especially in the summertime when things get dry. So, and that's what happens with not enough water, your piles will stall, and then it'll act more like a cold system rather than a hot system. So these two videos tend to be our number one and two watched videos just because it's just trying to figure out the consistencies of those ratios in order for it to make it work. So that hot phase, I want you to take a look at this chart here. So the axis here that has temperature that goes up from 80 all the way up to 160 on the left. Then the bottom axis is days of decomposition. So if we were to build our pile and the temperature of that pile is about 90 degrees, that's where the lines start, all there. But if you look at how many days that we actually turn the pile, you'll notice the temperature variances of how many days of that pile decomposing, but how frequently are we actually turning that pile? So look at the temperature on day one. If we were to turn the pile every 3 days, if you look at the piles day one, two, it's starting to, and then all of a sudden it shoots up to almost 160 degrees if we were to turn it every 3 days. Then all of a sudden you notice that then there's a sharp decrease, which is normal. That's supposed to happen. And that decrease will start to happen between days 20 and 30. Then eventually it'll just start to decompose at a slower rate. But you had that initial kickstart, and with that high temperature, it'll end up killing off the weed seeds and also starting to really decompose things at a faster rate. The middle line, if we were only turning our pile every 10 days, you'll see that yes, there was some growth. We had some growth in temperature there to maybe about 120 degrees, but then it plateaued a little bit. That's what happens when you have that plateauing. That means that nitrogen has already been burned off, but there isn't another source of it to keep it going by adding that oxygen and adding those remixing of those materials. So that plateau will stay that way until you mix it again, and then all of a sudden there'll be a little boost again. Or you might have to add some more nitrogen to provide that boost to keep it going. And then the last line here is that if you were only to turn it every 30 days, there was a very few temperature increase, maybe to only about 120 degrees. And then it kind of just stays that way. And it would continue that way for literally months afterwards because it's going to take a much longer process to process all of that. The one thing I will say that we get a lot of questions about is that after that initial phase of mixing, that you will notice that your pile will shrink in half, and that's normal. That is supposed to happen. If your pile isn't shrinking down in half over those, between the first 30 days, that's where you want to make sure that you got the right ratios in there because something else isn't right if it's not shrinking down in half during that the initial fixing for initial mixing. Sorry. All right. So I think let's see where we at. Okay. So how do we know if it's compost yet? Again, when you turn the pile no longer heats up, meaning you can't see steam or you can't feel the temperature, or if you have a thermometer to actually monitor those temperatures. It looks dark, crumbly, and sweet smelling. So it kind of, if you look at the top corner there, the pile on the right, that's what you want it to look like. After you can see, there might be some still remnants of some, let's say a bigger stick or that's the stuff that you can like sift out. And then if the majority of the pile looks like the pile on the right in the picture, then you're finished. And then you just want it to sit. So you need to cure that, especially if you're putting that finished compost on your vegetable beds. And the reason for that is that there's still some heat within that. If you were to put that finished compost and not right after it finished decomposing and didn't let it sit or rest or cure, then that some of that residual heat is still within that pile. And then you were to put it on new seedlings, like new seed starts, you potentially could burn your seed starts by having too hot of compost and adding it to your new seed starts. So it's best to let it cure. And that way, then the temperature eventually will just become with the ambient temperature of their surroundings. And ultimately, overall, you should be able to get that finished compost, including curing, between that 4 and 6 month mark. Okay. All right. Questions?
Yes, we have two questions. First, what happens if you overload with greens?
I would add more browns. You have to balance it out. So if you have a really sloppy, soupy mess from there, you got to add browns, that bulking agents. Right now, that's why, and actually, I'll stop there because I'm going to get to the slide here. I know we're getting to the end of it here, but I do have a thing about doing some correction. So,
Okay, and
um,
then there is another question.
okay.
If it's steaming, is it producing methane?
Um, yes, but um, there are levels of accepted levels of methane. Um, within a home system. And that one I actually will put in the follow-up document because I we don't have enough time to go into the full answer, but I will put in a link into the follow-up resources that will explain the percentages that are deemed allowable within a home system.
That covers the questions for now.
Okay, great. All right, so let's look at harvest composting, how to use it, and then do a couple troubleshooting in our last 15 minutes here. Okay, so right now harvesting the pile from it. So again, if I look at the majority of my pile and it looks, brown, crumbly, doesn't have a smell, doesn't have any real heat to it temperature wise that you can feel or see, then and minimal stuff that still hasn't been finished, broken down. So again, maybe a few thicker sticks that are still in there. What I would do is I would take that pile, I would sift it. And this one I just basically used a piece of hardware cloth um, and a wood frame. I used it on top of a wheelbarrow here. I poured the finished compost in. I shook it. All the finished compost goes into the wheelbarrow bin. And then anything left behind that didn't decompose, I would use that to build a new pile, new compost pile. And some of those larger sticks may take a couple times to go through a composting process before they're fully broken down. That's why, again, you need some structure for some air pockets, but sometimes for those, the breaking it down into smaller pieces is better because, again, it decomposes faster. How do you use it? All kinds of different methods for using it. The number one thing that has changed significantly is they used to tell you that when you're digging a hole to plant a new plant is to put the compost in the hole. That is incorrect. You want to put it into the entire planting area, just not the holes. Um, and you don't have to do it every time, meaning if you put compost down in the spring or you want to do it again at a different time of year when you have your processing there, um, there's limits to how much compost that actually is needed for some of these and what um, some research was done by Oregon State University about the amount of compost people were putting on their beds. They had realized that the varying levels of compost being added to the beds actually was causing more harm than doing good. So what they end up doing is there's a publication here that also will be in the link follow-up resources, and that's OSU's Oregon State University publication on how to compost in gardens and landscapes. And then part of that is how to actually use the finished compost. Um, and the reason they did this is that when they just created this during the pandemic, because they realized that a lot of people were at home, they were in their yards, they were using compost, but all of a sudden, all these other plant disease problems and other issues were happening, growth problems, all this stuff. And they realized that people were either under applying or over applying, and most of it was over applying. So they created this fact sheet to help people to properly learn how to use finished compost without putting too much out into your landscapes. So again, we'll put that link into that publication in our follow-up resources. So for us, once we've sifted it, we put it into a container like this that you're seeing on there. And then what happens is when the other volunteers are needing to add compost to the other areas within the demonstration garden, they come here, they grab some compost, and then they work on the bed that they're using it. So that's how we kind of stockpile it as being this one container of this is where the finished compost is. And if they need it, they come there and grab it. All right. So what should I be doing with my piles right now? So if you currently have piles, they may have been cooking all winter long, so you want to evaluate at what state are they in right now. Are they almost ready to be finished, meaning they've been cooking and there's a lot of the decomposition's already happened and they just might have a few bits and pieces that haven't been fully decomposed? Or right now, are you noticing that, yes, I built the pile, but it's not really doing anything? You might right now need to add a little bit of nitrogen to your pile to get it started again so it can finish off. I'm not talking a ton, but at least a little bit, a bucket or two of green material in order to make sure that you can finish out. Also check the moisture content. We've been monitoring a couple of our piles all winter long, and there was two of our piles that were bone dry. So really making sure that though it's watered, you turn it, and if it's still not heating up and you still are not noticing that it finishing, you might have to add again a little bit of nitrogen to get that pile restarted so it can finish out. Also, if you're stockpiling sources right now, if you have sources of carbon that you can stockpile now because soon you're going to have a ton of green material. You're going to have a lot of nitrogen because you're going to have fresh stuff that you're deadheading, plant material that you're wanting to take out. All of a sudden this summer, you're going to have tons of green and you're going to be minimal on your browns. So your bulking agents. So if you have that stuff now, stockpile it so that way you can have the right ratios when you're trying to build new piles um, throughout the summer here. Troubleshooting, we also have a handout that has all of the symptoms. So if you're having problems, we have a chart here that tells you here's the symptom in the left column. The middle is telling you what the actual result of it, what the problem is. And then the right column is the solution for it. So the center is dry, contains tough material. The answer is it's not enough water. So you want to soak the materials and moisten and turn the pile. So again, lots of different troubleshooting scenarios for that particular handout. This I just took a little snippet of the chart. Your composting critters you want to be mindful of as well. Flies will happen this summer, and that's just because it's too dry of a surface. So typically, if you have a fly issue, I would take some wet cardboard, put that on top of your compost pile, and the flies will not prefer to lay their eggs on wet or slick surfaces. So if you have flies, just water it. Mice and rats, again, just turning the pile. If you keep turning it, they try not to establish a nest in your pile. So the more you are for a hot system turning it, you'll have less of a risk for mice and rats in that pile is just because you're turning it. And they like to have places that aren't disrupted. The one thing I will be mindful of right now is the slugs and snails. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. Snakes, ants, and spiders. Snakes may have been in there for winter nesting, they'll typically leave once the weather gets better. So let's say some snakes did get into it. Again, they're garter snakes. We don't have to worry about anything more uh, challenging than that. So again, they're good, beneficial snakes for our gardens. But they'll move along as the weather gets better. They were just looking for a place to overwinter. Ants only happen when your pile's too dry, and spiders are good. That's a good thing. So spiders actually eat a lot of the other pests that potentially might be a nuisance insect in your piles. This is what I want you to look at right now. So in your piles right now, slugs and snails are going in there because it's warm. It's warmer than outside. And right now it's mating season. So they are laying these clusters of eggs right now. And so you want to look for those and you want to destroy them from your compost piles. Right now, we have non-native slugs outranking our native slugs 3-1. And right now, those eggs are your summer slugs. So if you leave those eggs in your compost pile, you've just put the finished compost out with those eggs in it. You've now spread eggs all over your yard. So you want to be monitoring for slugs and keeping them out of your compost pile so that you're not going to be spreading all those eggs all over your yard and have more slugs this summer. So you're always working to manage slugs a season before they actually are existing in your yard. So right now we're trying to prevent our summer slugs by managing the eggs now. Questions?
Yeah, two questions. One, so all greens, weeds, roots, etc., that come from the garden can go in the compost pile.
Not all. Again, weeds that have already gone to seed, and also some of those more invasive type plants like ivy. I listed a few of them earlier in the buttercup. Shoot, I can't write the name off but earlier in my slide of this presentation, I listed ones that morning glory, things like that that are tend to be a little bit more aggressive. You don't want to put in your compost pile. Was there
Uh,
another question?
Yes, and then should large passive piles be covered to prevent leaching nutrients?
You could. That's another way to keep the nutrients in the pile rather than them leaching out. Yes, by covering them with a tarp is a one way that you could try to keep manage it. Also, what I would say is trying to get some of those maybe a PVC pipe or some logs or sticks to provide some oxygen in there will also help with those cold systems as well. Um, that even if you don't turn the pile, trying to get oxygen to the center of the pile will help it ultimately break down faster.
And that's it for now.
Okay. All right, so the composting resources there. We're going to give you a link to our webpage that literally has everything that I said follow up to. It's all of that stuff is on our website right now. But we're going to send you this link here so that you can easily find it, and then you'll be able to look at all the resources that we have on our page. The other important part is that we also list our monthly work composting workshop schedule. So today's on Zoom, and we also have another one on October 27th on Zoom. The rest of our monthly workshops are in person at our demonstration gardens. So this resource list is listed on our website, which you can then come out to our demonstration gardens, and that's where we go through the pros and cons and all the other, you can see it in person, which I think for when you're building new, especially new to composting, it's helpful to see it in person so that you can see the consistency of what you're trying to put in and also when it's finished. So I would encourage you to come to some of our workshops in person so that you can get that experience there or to get your questions answered if you have an existing bin and you're having trouble. They list the location, but they also list the topic. So our next ones are both worm composting, but then we go back into the food and yard waste ones starting in May, and then they'll be out through the summer there. So our April ones are just more worm focused, but then we typically have some worm and food and yard waste sprinkled all throughout the rest of the summer. Here's our main backyard composting publication that I also will be on our website there, but this is the main one that has also the pros and con list bins, but also troubleshooting chart is also in this publication as well. And you can always email us. We have a general inbox there for any of our gardening, composting, and recycling questions at master@co.thurston.wa.us. And our certified master gardener and master recycler composter volunteers monitor that inbox and answer your questions remotely. And I again encourage you to come out to our three gardens. We have three public gardens that we have composting at each of those sites. Closed Loop Park, which is out at the Hawks Prairie Waste and Recovery Center there in Lacey. Dirtworks is in Yager Park in West Olympia, and the Olympia Farmers Market Garden. We just have worm composting down there at the garden that is adjacent to the Olympia Farmers Market. So our volunteers maintain all of these three spaces and manage the organic material that is produced by those gardens. So on that note, that's a whirlwind about composting. So we want to thank you for your attending our lunch and learn today. And like I said, if you have specific questions, please reach out to us, or we hope to see you at an upcoming in-person workshop at any of our gardens. Thank you for coming today.